Did you see the series about the blue zones where people are more likely to live to 100? It got us thinking.
We thought, hey, I wonder if there's any like blue zones for healthy weight. We could probably learn from them. Over half of the world population will be overweight or obese by 2035. Italy, Sweden and Germany, they've kind of leveled out. France is the only country that's actually gone down. They eat 3 times the amount of animal fat as we do, but they had the lowest rates of coronary heart disease.
You eat a pizza in Italy, you don't feel like you're going into a food coma afterwards.
For Italian diet, it doesn't scream like health food. The global average screen time, 6 hours 40. Japan, 3 hours 56.
They're not thinking, oh, I need to do 8,000 steps a day. They're just like, I'm just living my life.
They had gardens, practice musical instrument, get together and play games. These are so important for mental health and stress. Why are we not doing it?
People who are on their like deathbeds said, what's things that you wish you'd have done? And a lot of it's like, I wish I hadn't worked so hard, or I wish I spent more time with family and friends. When like our generation starts to get to that age, it's going to be, I wish I didn't spend as much time on my phone. Hi, I'm Jaymie.
And I'm Stacey.
And this is the Body Smart Podcast.
We are women's weight loss experts, and we are on a mission to empower you to take control of your health and your weight and everything about feeling good in your body and your mind. And we are talking today about health for the long term, because we've been watching separately, but Jay watched Blue Zones and then got me onto it and I watched it, and we were like, this is interesting, because there's obviously, if you haven't seen it, there's certain communities around the world that have a higher number of
people that live over
centenarians,
live over 100.
Yeah. And so basically this TV show, it's on Netflix, just like goes and looks for the common factors amongst these communities. What are they doing that are helping people live longer? And as we were watching it, we're like, I mean, a lot of these are the things that we tell people to do. So we thought, hey, I wonder if there's any like blue zones for healthy weight or like general well-being in terms of physical body. Because it's definitely not the UK or the US. We've like both countries have got over 70% of our population either overweight or obese. So we're not in a good space.
Wild.
Yeah. So actually we thought if there are places out there that are doing different things, we could probably learn from them. And a recent study in The Lancet actually predicts that over half of the world population will be overweight or obese by 2035. So it's not just UK, US or developed world, it's everywhere.
Yeah, and it's weight becomes a sensitive topic, but there is a clear indicator between a heavier body or a bigger body and longevity.
Yeah.
And I'm very well at that because I'm tall, and there's not like if anyone's listening to this, like I'm 6'3". Like, do you know anyone who's 6'3" over 70?
And you're 100 kilos.
And I'm 100 kilos. Yeah. The answer is probably not, or it's like a needle in a haystack, and that's just because a big body just requires more, whether that's more food, more calories, more oxygen, more water, and that just overall puts more stress on your organs, your body, your digestive system, like everything as a whole, and you just can, increase the risk of heart disease or heart attacks, certain cancers, because you are just having more.
And like you say, it's more strain on every
function
everything of your body.
Yeah.
So if there are things that people are doing to live longer and be healthier, you want to know what it is, because you might not be living that long.
Yeah, I mean, the goal is obviously to live definitely past 70. And like that's something that I like, when we're talking about weight. So like you said, I'm like 100 kilos. Like I've already even had this conversation with Steph. It's like as I probably get to and probably the earlier I would do this, actually probably the better from longevity. But I would probably actually look to lose weight and to maybe drop, somewhere between 10 and 15 kilos, another like 20 to 30 pounds. Just because a lighter body is going to need fewer calories, and there's going to be less overall pressure and stress on my body. So, there's that side of it of like, that's something probably the earlier I do, the better. And even though I'm not overweight, my body fat percentage isn't necessarily overweight, but it still doesn't mean that stress isn't on my body. And that's something that you see, like not just with tall people over 70, like you won't see anyone probably obese over 70. So there is a clear pattern between,
Actually, there was that post we put out on Instagram recently, which a lot of people got upset about, because we talked about BMI and the sweet spot of between BMI of 22 to 25 is medically shown people within that range have less risk of things like heart disease, stroke, blood pressure problems, various cancers.
Yeah.
It isn't just like you're saying, people who have high body fat, it is the BMI itself. People do get upset about it because they're like, well, I'm really strong and fit and I exercise and I'm overweight, inverted commas.
Yeah.
You're a good example of that.
Yeah.
But you're saying, yeah, I accept that also means I have a higher risk.
It does. And like, that's, you know, you can always look for like the needle in the haystack. You might be like, well, I know 74-year-old Barry who's overweight and still really active and all this. And it's like, okay, but that might be like 1 in 1,000. And that doesn't mean that, you know, and he might be on certain medications and there's other things that can come into that. And like, that's great. But like statistically, you want to stack the odds in your favor. And weight management is going to be a huge part and a huge part of longevity.
So let's look at the places that are doing well, if we want to call it that, because I've got a lovely chart here from the World Health Organization, which shows obesity rates between 1990 to 2024. Pretty much everyone is like on a very steep upward slope. And interestingly, there's a lot of countries that we would say maybe we're in the global south or less economically developed countries, which kind of makes sense because in the 90s, perhaps people didn't have the resources to buy as much processed food or whatever. They were living on a very simple diet and maybe doing more manual jobs, whereas as their economies have developed, they've got more access to more of the things that we have in the US, UK. So you've got like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, maybe not less economically developed, but different culture. Mexico, Argentina, they're all like up there of very high obesity rates now in the high 30s, 40s. There are a few who have bucked the trend. So Italy, Sweden and Germany haven't kept climbing. They've kind of leveled out, which is interesting. And France is the only country on this chart that's actually gone down.
Wow.
Only one, which is quite crazy. There are some countries that were already very, very low. Like they started off at like 2% obesity and they've gone up to like 5% obesity.
Right.
So in...
Relatively.
Yeah, in relative terms, you know, they have doubled, but they're still very low. So that's like your Japan, India, China. But what I wanted to really look at is places like France, Italy, Germany. They are in the same kind of culture, if you want to say, as like Britain, technically-ish. But, you know, they have access to supermarkets and lots of office type jobs that we have, you know, TV, screen time, all of that kind of stuff is very normalized. So what are they doing differently? Because the UK certainly is not in a good place with it. As I said, 70% overweight or obese. So what can we learn from them? So the first thing I looked at was, is it what they're actually eating? But if you think of like a French or Italian diet, it doesn't scream like health food.
Yeah, it's wild, isn't it? Because if you speak about, you know, or if you watch social media, people are like, you need to cut out bread and carbohydrates and pasta and rice. And you go to Italy and it's like, that's all you eat. But it is just different. Like the ingredients that they use, you know, like even with how they make the bread. Like you eat a pizza in Italy and you feel like, you don't feel like you're going into a food coma afterwards. You eat a Domino's or eat a pizza here, you're like, oh, just like can't move.
And they did cover this on that Blue Zones TV show, actually, because they said, yeah, they do eat pasta and bread and pizza, but it's all kind of homemade and it's mixed in with lots of vegetables and meats, and it's not just like a massive bowl of pasta on its own. Yeah.
Which makes a big difference, you know, the extra ingredients that are going into these more processed pastas, how we're digesting them, how we're utilizing them. A lot of them are a lot more calorie dense as well. So you get more calories for like less food. So yeah, it makes a significant difference. But you're right, when you look at these countries, you don't...
We think like French food is like very cliche, but you know, bread, cheese, processed meats as in like, you know, saucisson, steak.
Wine.
You know, a lot of the things actually, if you went to a doctor and they told you you need to lose weight, they would immediately be like, right, cut down on red meat, cut down on wine, cut down on saturated fats like cheese. But they're eating a lot of those things.
But the big one I would say, and you do see this when you go to Italy or France, it's the portion sizes. They are incomparable to like, I would say like the stepping stone would be like quite a few European countries, like very small portions. UK, bigger portions. US, it's like supersized times 10. like to the point where it's just like, there's so much food on a plate in the US that's like sometimes you can't, we already eat past full and you still haven't finished your meal, versus in a lot of these European countries, it's like just enough food.
Yeah. And also they eat slowly, like meal times are still a standalone part of the day. Whereas if you think about how we tend to eat, it's almost like a chore that has to get done to get through the day. It's not like, let's all go for lunch. I mean, actually, we do make an effort of doing that in the office, but it's not commonplace, I would say, in a lot of workplaces that people go as a group, sit down, put phones and computers away and sit and enjoy their lunch. And actually, there was a study by the OECD about time spent eating and drinking. And in France and Italy, they spend 133 minutes and 127 minutes respectively eating. So that's like over 2 hours a day eating.
Yeah.
Can you imagine someone here spending over 2 hours eating?
Like our advice around trying to eat mindfully is
try and
10
do
minutes.
10 to 20 minutes
you know
per
what I mean?
meal.
Which I'd
People
say
struggle.
People really struggle. I mean, I struggle with that.
Yeah.
And yeah, like and there's also like the social side of that as well. Like you're having an hour out in the middle of your day, you're chatting with your friends and your colleagues, and you're having some time to eat mindfully, take your time. I guess it plays into that like stressed, rush, got to get done, not enough time in the day.
Yeah. And what happens when we eat in a stressed, distracted way? We eat more than we intend to. Our bodies don't register that we've eaten. So within a shorter period of time, we want food again, because satiety isn't just about what's physically in your stomach. A lot of it is mental. If you can't really remember eating that much, your brain will tell you you still need to eat again.
Yeah.
And we don't tend to sit down and have the time to cook lunch. Even if we work from home, like I eat leftovers because I don't have time to make a fresh meal. It's better than getting something maybe like a microwave meal. But, you know, even in like best scenarios in the UK, it's still pretty grab and go. Whereas if you think somebody's taking over 2 hours a day on sitting down and eating, there's a high chance they're sitting down and eating decent quality food as well.
Yeah. And I think that social element plays a huge part in it as well. You know, actually just being able to sit with people, enjoy your food, have a chat. It's wild because I'm saying this and I'm not practicing what we're preaching here to an extent. You know, maybe I will go through this, but I will say, so when I done counselling like 2 years ago, one of the things that the counsellor said to me, she was said, hey, run me through your day, like basically like every 15 minutes, like what it looks like, and pretty easy for me because my week is just like methodically laid out. But like very short times when I would be eating, I'd be watching a YouTube video to learn more, or I'd be listening to something as well. And she's like, nothing. You need to just sit there, be mindful, and enjoy your food. If you want, maybe have some music on. Like that's it. Kind of just be with yourself, be with your thoughts, and eat the food. And yes, I ate my food more slowly, and I did enjoy it more, and I did taste it more, which were all great things and stuff that we talked to our clients. But a huge part of it was I found when I did this, when I got to the end of the day, I didn't feel like burnt, like spent. Like typically when I get to the end of my day, I'm like exhausted. You know what I mean? Sometimes like I'll even try and speak to Steph, and it's like I just like if she wants to have like a big conversation, I'm like I haven't got it in me. Like I'm just done. But that was like every day, and then I tried doing this even just a couple of days a week. I got to the end of the day and I felt like, oh, I've still got my cup's not empty, and that was just from having a few times in the day where literally when I had my food, I was just more mindful and more present around.
That's so interesting, because if people are getting to the end of the day feeling completely zapped, then are they turning to something on the sofa, like a little sweet treat to pick them up, or they feel effectively more stressed, so that stress eating?
Yeah, or again, like not spending as much quality time with friends or partners because you're so tired.
Not wanting to do activity.
Yeah, and it's tough because, in that like zoomed in right here, right now approach, it's like there's not enough time, I need this, there's not enough many hours in the day. The more, I guess I'm even going into like the game of business and the game of health, it's like just looking at like the longer game of just like there's another day, there's another week, and there's another month. And it doesn't mean you can't be busy and get stuff done now, but like really trying to be more intentional about your day and how you spend your time. So nobody wants to be in that heightened state of like stress, go, like 16 hours a day. It's exhausting, and it will have a knock-on effect, no doubt, to how you deal with that.
Yeah. Okay, so that's one element then that we've seen I've just actually got back from France as well, and I would say the supermarkets are pretty obviously different in terms of like the ratio of processed foods to whole foods, and like even the way they're laid out. So, you know, if you go into a UK supermarket, the first thing that hits you is like pallets of offers on alcohol, crisps, chocolate, whatever it might be, but it's pallets of processed food. Then you might get to the vegetable section, then maybe like the meats, and then on to the rest of the stuff. Whereas in France, it was straight into the veg. Then there was like a really massive, beautiful cheese counter, fresh butchery counter, fresh bakery. Then you got into the processed stuff. But it wasn't like end of aisle promotions like we have. It wasn't just everywhere in your face, buy 3 packets of this.
Yeah.
It was just there. They did have the processed food. I'm not going to discount that. But it did seem to be a lot toned down in terms of like marketing compared to what we have here.
Yeah. I wouldn't know if that's like a government thing or a state
I don't
thing.
know, actually.
Yeah.
So when I was researching this, it was really hard. So everything in this episode is just conjecture, because they do have a program that they introduced in the 2000s. I can't remember the acronym now, but it's basically like the French health program. And there are different strands to it under like education, nutrition, activity, policies.
Yeah.
But to be honest, every government has this. So like we have the Healthy Start thing in the UK, and we've got like Change for Life, and we've got like vouchers for food, fruit and veg for kids.
Yeah.
We have these policies, but it doesn't necessarily mean we've got the sugar tax on sugary drinks, and it has improved things. But I don't know if it's just because it's such a cultural shift. The other thing that I found really interesting, I found this study which was done in the 80s when cholesterol was like this big thing that people were freaking out about, like don't eat eggs, all that kind of stuff. And they called it the French paradox, because in France, they eat 3 times the amount of animal fat as we do, but they had the lowest rates of coronary heart disease.
Wow.
Says a lot. It just like blew everything out of what people were saying was causing the problem. So it really doesn't look like it's what they're eating in terms of like the actual foods, but maybe like how much they eat, like you said, or how they're eating it, or the quality of that food potentially. Also, the other thing that one of our colleagues mentioned is just generally, and this ties into what you were saying, everything tends to be a little bit slower paced. Like the average working week is 35 hours. In the UK, it would be 40. In the US, it's probably more. I don't know. And there's just like a different work-life balance and expectation on where you spend your time.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely see that from a cultural standpoint. It's even when I went to like, it's so weird, isn't it? Because it just depends what season of life that you're in. I went to Byron Bay in Australia, and that had a very European, slow-paced vibe. And I was like, oh, you could live here. It's lovely. But like, there's that part of me that's like, oh, I don't want to live here at this season in my life, because, you know, it's you just would. I think as a proxy of being in that environment, you would naturally slow down and be a little bit more relaxed. And then,
sorry, I just looked. I was like, oh, where's Australia on the chart? They've actually got a higher rate of obesity than the UK.
Australia. That's interesting.
Very
I would, yeah. There's me gonna think we could blame the sun. It's like middle of summer right now, and there just has been
There's no
summer.
sun.
Yeah, at all. Yeah, interesting. It's I think a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here with like the blue zone stuff about like eating more mindfully, smaller portions, managing your weight, like they are all things that we typically talk about. It is just about putting them into practice and creating your environment to stay consistent with them day to day.
It's exactly that. And I think that's what stood out from the TV show is when they came to do the summary at the end, they were like, these environments facilitate this longevity lifestyle. So people walked everywhere. They had gardens. They like spent time with extended family because that was the environment or the social situation. Whereas if you look at our environments and social situations, it's very obesogenic instead. And so there's a whole list of things that are making it harder for us to make healthy choices. So that's things like the availability of high calorie foods, like I just said, in the supermarkets, portion sizes, marketing and advertising everywhere, like in the supermarket, yes, but on your phone, in YouTube ads,
everywhere.
on TV, in magazines, on billboards, in your face, everywhere.
You know what? I got an ad yesterday. I've never had an ad on this. I don't know if any of you guys have. You know, on your smart TV, you have like the bar at the bottom where it has like Netflix, Amazon Prime. There was ads in the bar.
Wow.
I was like, have you seen that before? I was just like, what is this? Like, how is my smart TV's bar now got an ad in it? And I was just like, yeah, but like it said, like that's not going anywhere, is it? Like, you know what I mean? It's just going to be continually more.
They'll just find more places to. Yeah. So I mean, those are all things that are part of our environment, but it doesn't mean that it has to dictate your choices. It does mean that it's harder. You have to be more conscious and you have to be more aware.
Yeah.
So what somebody could do, for example, I find this really helpful. I don't know, again, in the US how widespread it is, but I shop online like for everything food-wise. I never actually go to a supermarket, mostly because of time. But it also means I'm not faced with these pallets of offers or like just food in my face I don't really need.
Isn't the same level of advertising just not on a website though?
I don't know because I just search. I just have my list of what I need and I put it in the search bar and I choose it and then that's what I get. So it's just a lot more intentional. You're not distracted by things. I find that really helpful. And I know I always see it recommended for people who are trying to shop on a budget for the same reason. Like you have your list, you just put it in the search box and there you get it and it comes up. And it's also really easy to compare prices, but also you can click open, look at the dietary information on one brand and then click open the next thing. You're not stood in an aisle in a supermarket feeling a bit weird reading packets. You're just in the comfort of your own home. You can do your research. I just think actually that puts you a lot more in the driving seat than going into this supermarket, which is purely there to take your money and sell as much food to you as possible.
Yeah. I think the caveat, like, as I have this conversation, because I would always do online shops, and then Steph doesn't want it, but she's always like, oh, but I'll get to pick the fresher food, or the food that doesn't looks a lot better. But yeah, I think online shopping is fine, definitely for being intentional. The one thing I always say, if you do go to supermarkets, just like, don't go hungry.
Oh my God, I did that today at lunch.
Yeah.
So bad. Came back with like 10 things.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that is a bit of a sad thing because you're right. If we had the options of going to a grocer's and a baker's and a butcher's, maybe we would buy nicer quality food and it would be healthier and there'd be more whole foods.
Whole foods, yeah.
And maybe that's part of it as well. If you looked at like in a French town, do they have more options for that kind of shopping? And if somebody's only working 35 hours a week, does that mean they've got more time to actually go to those shops when they're open? Because, I mean, most people now work when those shops are open.
Yeah.
So it's not even an option for you. So if you are in that boat, then I would say online shopping is a solution. If you have got the choice to go to a local butcher's and a local grocer's, then great.
Yeah. I mean, again, if you would just look at like local butchers, older local shops that like used to be there, probably going to get more whole foods, more locally sourced, hopefully higher quality. And then you get most things from the supermarket, more heavily processed food, stuff that's got longer sell-by dates, you know, preservatives in there to keep them to last longer, so there's higher profit margins. So yeah, it all plays a role, but it's just looking at what you can do to navigate the situation that you're currently in right now. If that all sounds like there's no way I could ever go to like a butcher's or, you know, a local supermarket, then yeah, like an online shop might really help you be intentional with the foods that you choose.
Something that's just started around me, actually, there's like a local farm that's like paired up with another local farm. So they're offering like a delivery service of like a veg box and a meat box. I haven't done it because you have to be too organised. You have to order it like 10 days in advance. I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to eat in 10 days' time. But if you were organised, there are more options cropping up now in the UK if you want to be more discerning with like where your food's coming from. Yeah,
definitely. It helps, but it's that's going to be a huge part. And I think in everything that you're seeing in the blue zones, there's like people are eating more whole foods. They were eating food with people. They were having a laugh and spending time and socialising with people. And they were enjoying the food. You know what I mean? It wasn't something that was like a rushed activity, like, right, I've got 15 minutes before I'm going to get back to work. It was a relaxed activity where they enjoyed their food and they often socialised. And it's definitely something that's missing in modern day society.
Yeah, and one of the blue zones was in Japan, and they have this like just normal thing that they call harahachibu, which means eating to 80% full. And that's one of the skills that we teach our clients, which it sounds like a weird thing to say, like, why wouldn't you eat till you're full? But if we think of full at being as like absolutely stuffed.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, if you're distracted, you get to absolutely stuffed before you realize, and then you come away from the table like, oh God, I overdid that. Whereas if that's always been ingrained in you to just, pay attention, once you start feeling like, actually, I'm not really that hungry anymore, just stop eating. Even that little thing can make a huge difference.
Yeah. And you'll find it's easier to notice the signals with that when you eat more whole foods. If you're eating more highly processed foods, you typically can eat them faster. You don't have to chew them as much, so you don't have to be as mindful, and you don't get the fullness feeling off them as much because they just don't fill you as much. So eating more whole foods certainly helps with that. But yeah, I used to be really guilty for this. So I would like wolf my dinner down. I'd be like, I'm still hungry. And then I'd like go and eat loads more. And then I'd be like, oh my God, I'm stuck. Like I would just be like, I've eaten too much. I've completely overdone it. Versus now I will try and eat more slowly. I will actually feel more full of the byproduct of doing that. And then even if I'm still hungry, I have like a rule of like, I'm going to wait 15 minutes. And if I'm still hungry, I'll go and get more food. And 99% of the time, I don't need to get more food.
That's a really good tip, actually. The other tip in a similar vein that Reese does, which I always found so weird, but like if he's on a cut, like bro, then he would always leave like a section of his dinner. So he would never eat his whole dinner, and he'd be like, I'll save it for later, and if I'm hungry later, I'll have it. So he would never be full after his meal, and then he'd be like, right, if I'm hungry, he calls it tensies. So if at 10 o'clock at night, he's like, yeah, no, I'm actually still really hungry, then he would have it. But it's the same kind of concept, but it's like not the mindful way of doing it.
Yeah.
So if you struggle with being mindful, that's a way of like forcing your mind, right, this is how much I think I need to eat. I'm going to intentionally not eat all of it. Then if I do need it, I can come back and I know it's there.
Yeah. No, definitely. And again, it's just with a lot of this stuff, it's being intentional first and then experimenting and then finding what works for you.
Yeah.
But like the whole thing of the blue zones is that like there's a through line, hopefully, that you can see of like, hey, here's all the zones where people are living over 100. And it's like, what's the pattern? Like there's a huge, we always say like success leaves clues, and a lot like everywhere, like more whole foods, eating mindfully, socializing.
Yeah.
And it's like, if that's something that you're not doing with how you eat on a day-to-day basis, like that's going to be a really great practice to start bringing in.
Did you know we have an award-winning one-on-one coaching program designed especially for women aged over 30 who want to lose between 15 and 60 pounds? Just like this podcast, our Body Smart method cuts through all the BS out there and brings together the latest weight loss science to fast-track your weight loss. Find out just how we can guarantee we can help you lose 15 to 60 pounds in the next 6 months at bodysmartfitness.com. And that's the food side of things. So the next side of things was like the lifestyle. And it was really obvious when you looked at if you watched the show, like it was very social, like you said, but it was also very natural to walk places, to like pop round and see your neighbour, to walk down to get your loaf of bread or whatever. You didn't just jump in the car to go everywhere. And again, this is something which it can feel like your environment is against you. And a lot of us live in areas where we physically couldn't walk to a shop, or your friends live half an hour away. You have to get in the car. But I think what we can all do is look at like, where are the options to maybe park a bit further away and walk the last bit? Or could you tie a few things together instead of driving into town 3 times that week, driving one time and walk between the places and pick up the bits? It will require some thought, and unfortunately, like our environments and our car dependency has come about from convenience, and we're time poor and we want things to be quick and easy, but we're kind of selling ourselves short in the process. Yeah,
you've really got to really try and be mindful of that. Like, so I've said like, hey, I'm going on holiday in a month and I'm going to lose a little bit of weight, a bit of body fat before I get there. And I was like, right, I'm not missing my 10,000 steps a day. Like I'm going to be militant with getting it done. And then yesterday I like wasn't on that many. We actually got back to the shops. Shop's about a 25-minute walk from the house. So that Steph was like, oh, I'm going to nip in and get some stuff. She's like, why don't you walk? So I did. I just literally jumped out and you know, it was like typically that would be something where I would just wait, I'd work on my phone and do something else. But if a lot of the time it's being intentional about looking for those opportunities and then just starting to factor them into like a normal part of your life. Yeah. So you can make that happen.
I totally agree with that actually, because my son's nursery is like 1.5 miles from our house. It's totally walkable. Yeah. But I have to be organised. I have to leave at like 7:15 in the morning if I want to walk him to nursery.
Yeah.
So I just have to be organised. That's it.
Yeah.
So it don't do it very often. But on days where I'm not going to move much otherwise, then I will make the effort. And I think that it's like intentionally making your day more difficult for a lot of people, which is why we just don't do it.
Yeah.
But you have to look at your why of like, is it actually going to make my life
Yeah,
easier
and
in the long run?
you have to look at the cost of that as well, you know what I mean? Of like not doing that. Like if you just implement one of these habits of like walking your kid to school or doing these other parts, and then it just becomes like that's the norm. It's like, okay, maybe we'll use the car if it's like heavily raining outside, which is like every day.
It's the UK.
Buy a really good coat. That's a very stoic way of looking at it. Like I will just dress for the weather. But it's, you know, if you start to put them things in place in the beginning, it feels like it's friction to do it. Like it feels like it's unnecessary, or like a way that's costing you time. But then over time, it just becomes the norm. The kids expect that. Your husband expects that. You expect that. And that's ultimately the case with a lot of these people in the blue zones. The shop is just 2 blocks away that they walk. So they just go and walk down a couple of streets and they get there. It's almost like their lifestyles are set up in a way that allows them to live a healthier lifestyle, be more sociable, walk a lot, walk up hills, and like that's just normal for them. You don't speak to, they didn't get interviewed by anyone like, I'm intentionally going for this walk. It was just like, oh, we're just going to see a friend.
It wasn't even commented on.
Except
from the person making the TV show, because to them it was such an unusual thing. Yeah.
So yeah, like that, and you have to look at that and be like, right, well, you may not live in these countries or these places that have the environment so set up for, like that for everyone else, but you actually have the power to curate your environment to have the same actions and activities that these blue zone areas have as well.
Yeah, and I think you have to maybe be open to the fact that you might be making your life a little bit more difficult in the short term by doing it. So like we only have one car, which means either I have to walk Nate to school and back, or Reese has to run to work and back.
Yeah.
Like most days, like we need the car at different times. And we are going to probably have to get a second car later in the year because he's on a course away. And I'm like, oh, I don't know if we want that for our lifestyle, because if we have the choice, we'll probably just jump in the car.
Yeah.
Whereas now we don't have the choice. It forces us both to be more active. Like it means that he runs probably like 15 to 20 miles a week.
Yeah.
Which if there was a car, maybe he might run twice.
Yeah.
You know, especially if, you know, sometimes he gets back on night shifts at like 1 a.m. He has to run home.
Yeah.
You're not going to do that if there's a car.
No.
So I think, you know, making your life more difficult can seem like a really weird thing to do to yourself, but actually in the long run, it's better for you.
It's like that whole like hard now, easy later, easy now, hard later. And it's something to be very mindful of with your health. Hopefully Simon can pull up this amazing stat for me, but it's I'm pretty sure it's the average American does around the average American does 3,000 to 4,000 steps a day. And if they were to increase their steps just to 8,000 a day, it decreases all-cause mortality by like 51%.
It's huge, yeah.
So just like literally, if you picked up your phone now and looked and seen how many steps you do, you could be like, okay, you know, right, getting an extra double in my steps today, I'm going to have to be really intentional about that. I'm going to have to change some things. But if you just start doing that now, it's going to feel difficult. It's going to feel a bit foreign. In 6 months or a year's time, it's just going to be part of your day-to-day routine. And then you're up at 8,000. All-cause mortality goes down by 51%. And sometimes, like, my mum, unfortunately, has this quite, like, morbid attitude towards it, which is, like, if something bad health-wise were to happen to her, she'd rather just, like, pop the clogs and sort of be gone. You know what I mean? Like, she'd rather just, like, have a heart attack and, like, that's it. Go out with a bang. But unfortunately, like, if she has what are we looking at here?
Si's got a very confusing graphic for me to try and decipher.
So if you see the steps, the way it's like quite steeply going down.
Yeah.
And then it gets to about 8,000, it starts tapering off. So that's sort of like...
Oh, that's your risk.
Like the point. Yeah, decreased risk. So you see the way it's about 8K and it starts slowing down.
Yeah.
So you're going to get to around 8 to 10.
Because actually there's not a huge amount of benefit going further on.
Like up to 16 or something.
Exactly,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, you know, obviously we're going to say if you want to walk more, do, but it's not going to give you a huge amount of difference in terms of all-cause mortality. But to bring it back to the conversation of like this episode being also about weight management.
Yeah.
If you are only walking 4,000 steps and you increase that to 8,000 steps, that's a good couple of hundred extra calories a day.
Yeah.
Which, if you make it a routine thing, it adds up without feeling like a lot of
Yeah.
effort to slowly start chipping away if you're wanting to lose weight.
Yeah, and that again makes a significant difference. If you're trying to maintain your weight, you get more calories. If you're trying to lose weight, you can lose weight on a higher caloric intake. But yeah, it's that whole idea. Like, it may feel difficult now for the next 6 months, a year, to implement doing 4,000 extra steps if you're at, going from 4 to 8. But like the cost of not doing that is, who knows? You know what I mean? Is it a short life expectancy? Is it the fact that, like I said, like my mum would rather have a heart attack and be done than have a stroke where she's debilitated, and the last 15 years of her life are miserable because of that.
Yeah.
So, I think, I know fear isn't always like a great motivator for people, but I think it's just like a reality check of like, just because you feel okay now doesn't mean there's not a cost to your level of inaction. And, some of these things like getting the 8,000 steps in a day, like you'd be surprised just how you can change quite a few things in your day to day. And if they just become habit, like just like the way the people do in the blue zones, like they're not thinking, oh, I need to do 8,000 steps a day. They're just like, I'm just living my life. I'm going to see Barbara at the end of the road, or I'm doing some gardening. Like, that's just what they do. And it's just become habit for them.
Yeah.
And you can literally do the same thing and make a lot of these ways of just being more active habit.
I want to come back to that gardening thing, because one of the other common factors in like our obesogenic environment is stress and mental health being pretty bad. And we don't take time for things like pottering in a garden or having like a creative hobby, or, those feel like non-productive things that don't really have a priority in our lives. Whereas actually, if you look at the blue zones, they practice musical instruments, they do gardening, they get together and play games.
Yeah.
Like, these are so important for connection, but mental health as well, and stress. Like, stress is such a huge effect on our hormones, our insulin levels, our cravings, our sleep, like everything.
Yeah.
And if you can factor in some time to do something that brings you a little bit of joy each day, like, why would you not? Even if there wasn't all these health benefits, why would you not?
Yeah. It's tough, isn't it? It's. I think.
It's easy to say because I
is.
don't do it every day.
Yeah.
But why are we not doing it?
We're having our attention hijacked, all the time, aren't we? On our phones, on social media, in our work, and it's like it just hooks and pulls us in so much, and so much of our time is wasted. Have you ever seen the interviews of like people in their like 80s or 90s, or people who are on their like deathbeds, and it's like the last 6 months before they're gonna die, and it's like, what's things that you wish you'd have done, less of throughout your life? And a lot of it's like, I wish I hadn't worked so hard, or I wish I spent more time with family and friends and connected. And one of the ones that they're actually starting to see, and they feel like is going to be a really big phenomenon for when people start, like our generation starts to get to that age, is it's going to be, I wish I didn't spend as much time on my phone. Like, and that's going to be something that comes up, because when you're seeing screen time at 6 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, it's like, wow, like living in the real world instead of behind screens is a much more enjoyable experience and calmer experience of life. So, really, and we've spoken about this many times, like not having your notifications on your phone, having strict boundaries with when you use your phone, definitely like not in the morning as soon as you get up, for sure helps. It takes you out of that like reactive state of just like doom scrolling, and allows you to be more intentional with your time and do the things that you were just talking about. Yeah,
and you've definitely hit the money there, because I did look up the screen time in these areas, and the global average is 6 hours 40 of screen time. US is 7 hours and 3 minutes, so they're higher than the average. Japan, 3 hours 56.
Wow.
France, 5 hours 22. So there is definitely a correlation there. And it's not just because of the stress and what you're saying, but like, if you think about, that's time where you're not walking around looking at your phone normally. You might be walking around listening to something, but you're not on your screen time proper. Yeah. So you're probably sat down. So you're just adding to that sedentary lifestyle that we already have because of our jobs, or our leisure time now is sitting watching TV or whatever it is. So if you go from the global average of 6 hours 40 on your phone to the Japan average of 3 hours 56, that's like nearly 3 hours where you're more likely to be moving around.
Yeah, it's and possibly less stressed as well. You know what I mean? By spending like that much time. So yeah, I think that's going to become one of the, just like an epidemic of just like posture and distraction and ADHD and just all of these negative things. It's just like the sheer volume of time that we're spending on your phone, but then obviously the health implications that we're talking about here with the blue zones.
And the mental health implications as well, because we talked about this with a guest the other day. I can't even remember which guest it was, but we were saying about, like there's so many fixes for the symptom, which is obesity, when actually a lot of the time the cause is mental health struggles. So like people having emotions they can't deal with, or trauma or stress. And actually lots of things we do in our daily life make our mental health worse. Yeah. And then the symptom is we end up overweight or struggling with our weight. So actually going back to the root of those and taking out some of the things that make mental health worse, like screen time, can really help.
Massively, yeah. And it's, I don't think there was one moment on the blue zones where you watched people sat behind the TV or spending an obnoxious amount of time on a phone. It was all, hey, we're going out salsa dancing, we're sat around the table laughing, we're gardening, we're doing some sort of physical activity. And a lot of it was like low intensity activity. I think I was saying this to you. It's because there's such a part now in the longevity space of like HIIT training and doing HIIT training like twice a week. And do we know what that, Si might know what that 20 minutes of HIIT is, where it's like 3 minutes as hard as you can, 1 minute off.
Norwegian method.
The Norwegian method.
4x4.
Yeah, 4x4. And it's absolutely horrendous. I've done it like twice. You know what I mean? It's like, it's very hard. And even prior towards this, it used to be zone two, go slow to go fast. And now this seems to be coming back. So it's interesting. I guess we're going to really much see if these people who have been doing this in the 50s and 60s obviously make it to being 100 or not.
But you're right. They're not stressing their bodies through things like HIIT in these blue zones. They're
walking up a hill.
Gardening.
Playing
tennis.
Yeah. But like leisurable activities, but like enjoying themselves and just naturally, very, very active as well.
Yeah. So we've talked about like a lot of the things that are environmental. One of the last elements is about education. And I think there's a huge black hole of education, like generationally in the UK and the US in terms of nutrition, like how to look after your body, what your body actually even needs. I'm not specifically in the blue zones that were featured on the TV show. I'm not sure about it there, but I know in a lot of other cultures there is a bit more respect for your body. Probably Japan, I would say, has that culturally. But, India, like the kind of Hindu yogic traditions are very much like look after you as a whole person. Whereas in our culture, it tends to be like siloed. Like, okay, your health is this, your mental health is this, your sexual health is this, and it's all divided up rather than just looking at the person. And I think that's something we really need to address as a society, is educating our kids and ourselves of like, what does a person need to be healthy, have a functioning body, be able to manage their weight, be able to nutritionally like take care of themselves.
Yeah.
And there is so much information out there, but there's a lot of shitty information out there.
Yeah.
So I don't really know what the answer is at the moment, because the government's got all these policies, but it doesn't mean that it actually trickles down in an effective way.
It doesn't. And as much as like, I think a lot of people would love to see like policy reform and things to change and education in schools. We can push and want for that to happen, and people should make it known. And like, it does seem ridiculous that you're going to eat food every day for the rest of your life, and it's not something that kids are taught in school. Like, it seems wild. Yeah. Even like finances, like learning to manage your money and manage your money well and effectively, not taught in school. Wild. And then mental health is becoming something that is spoken about a little bit more in schools. But yeah, when you look at diets, the healthiest diet on paper, still statistically by a long mile, is the Mediterranean diet. So as much as we're seeing like these vegan diets come out and these carnivore diets, and which is ironic because they're both extremes of each other, there just isn't data to show that these are healthy long-term diets. And a lot of the Mediterranean diet is like everything we keep talking about, like whole foods, minimally processed, lots of olive oil.
It's not low fat.
It's not low fat, it's high fat.
But there's lots of like whole food sources of protein. So there's like pulses, beans, whole grains.
Yep.
So there's lots of fiber. So I mean, we don't advocate for like diets in inverted commas, but if there was going to be any, if you wanted to like have a framework to help you make good food choices, that would be a good place to start.
Yeah, if you could base the majority of your diet around the Mediterranean diet, I think you're going to be in a fantastic place from a health standpoint.
Yeah.
But this is always something to just take into consideration, is that like two people can eat the exact same foods and get completely different outcomes in terms of their health. Like health is unique to you. Genetics play a role. There's many different things that play a role. So you do always have to look at it like there's never a one size fits all approach, and that's what people are always looking for with a meal plan or a training plan. Like, what's the perfect plan for me?
Yeah.
And it's like, guess what? It doesn't exist. You've got to go and figure out. Like, there might be like tried and true like patterns of success, and the Mediterranean diet definitely could be one of them. But there may be certain foods on a Mediterranean diet that aren't good for you, and it's figuring out like, does your gut tolerate them? Do they affect your HDL and LDL in a negative way when you get a blood test? It's like, like, okay, maybe you need to dial this back down or a little bit more of this. And it's just figuring out what that looks like for you. And I would
just say to somebody, like, you don't have to get the perfect diet in inverted commas, but if you can figure out like 5 meals, start with 5 meals that you feel like, that's actually a good nutritionally balanced meal. I like it. My family will eat it. I can afford it. Just start there. Even if you eat the same 5 meals every week for 4 weeks, then you can be like, hey, how can I mix this one up a bit? How could I maybe learn another one next week? And that can be a way to find, like you were saying, the diet for you. You kind of have to create it for yourself, but it is going to take work and it is going to take a bit of time and research.
Yeah. And instead of looking at it as like a drag, just you really should look at it as an investment. I mean, I don't want to use
an adventure. Like you get to go and like look at all these recipes and get inspiration and maybe try stuff you haven't tried before.
Yeah. And that's again something that's missing in today's culture, is like there's a lot of home cooking. It's just not happening. And it's again like maybe that time that you spend with your family or with your kids, but you're cooking the food yourself, you're controlling the food and the ingredients that's going in. Instead of just like takeouts and driving through restaurants and everything else. And again, it all plays into that idea of like it's saving you time now, but it's costing you time later.
Yeah.
And I think it's just something that you always need to take on board.
Yeah, definitely. So one thing that I wanted to bring up, actually, like we've covered a lot of the physical, practical things you can do. There was actually a project in the UK that came off in the US, that came off the back of the TV show called the Blue Zone Project, original. But they were like, hey, let's actually see if we try and reverse engineer this stuff, if we try and create these environments, what happens? And so they did. The first one was in Minnesota, and they put in bike lanes, and they got schools and grocery stores and restaurants to like improve the health factors of their foods. They improved like the ability to join volunteering groups, walking groups, and like sports. After 18 months, they raised the life expectancy of the average citizen by 3 years.
It's insane.
They didn't tell anyone, you have to get healthier. We're doing all this stuff to get you healthier.
Yeah.
They literally just changed the environment and the opportunities, which I thought was amazing. So they improved the life expectancy by 3 years, and they shaved 30% off the average healthcare bill.
Which is just, it's insane, isn't it? Like why that just shouldn't be becoming more and more of a thing, like across the world and across cities.
Yeah.
But
they've done it in a bunch of other places, 72 cities in America. The other one that I thought was really interesting in Naples in Florida, because this was a outcome they measured obesity. They did a similar thing, again, just changing the environment, changing like some policies in certain areas. After 5 years, they had a 23% lower obesity rate.
Nuts. And one thing that probably isn't measured because it's a harder thing to measure, but I bet no doubt the quality of people's life is better.
Yeah.
Their mental health is better. They feel better. They look better. They've got more energy. They're happier.
Yeah.
Just as a byproduct of the environment changing around them. So it makes such a significant difference.
And I'd love for every government, council, whatever, to just do this stuff. And maybe in time they will. But right now, if you're listening, you're the one that can do this for yourself. Like we said earlier, it might be making your life maybe slightly less convenient. But if those are the kind of outcomes that you can get, it's kind of worth the effort in my mind.
Longer life expectancy, better quality of life, a happier, healthier, fitter version of you.
Yeah.
Not small things to overlook.
Definitely. So yeah, that's a bit of a summary of our like rabbit hole we went down after watching the TV show. It's a really interesting TV show. I would definitely recommend it.
Yeah.
And even if you just want to be nosy at some really pretty parts of the world, I found that bit.
No,
quite
it
nice
was.
too.
It was great, and I mean, you know, seeing people who have lived over 100 is amazing. You know, 100 years old is.
And they didn't look it, did they?
No, and the guy, there was this one guy on a horse. You remember him at certain point as he come back out? And I was like, he was like 103, and I was like, get the hell out of here! This guy's 103, riding a horse, doing a bit of salsa dancing and eating some great food. And it's like, how amazing! You know what I mean? He still looks like he's enjoying his life and living his life. And it's like, he still looks like he's having a good time. And I think a lot of people, when they get to a certain age, they just think you're done. You've got no energy. You're sleepy. You're tired. Everything hurts.
In a chair.
Yeah, and instead, you know, you've got people there who are 103 with vitality. And isn't that great? Like, I think the thing that scares people the most about getting old is like losing your mobility, losing your health.
Your independence.
You know? Yeah, losing your independence. But when you see these guys and women in their hundreds still, you know, having a great time, it's like, wow, you know what I mean? There could be so many, could be some of the best years of your life ahead of you if you take the steps to ensure that can happen now.
Yeah, definitely. So,
Yeah, the Blue Zones, give it a watch. It's very insightful, and it's a lot about what we talk about on this podcast. But I think just hopefully it can even reaffirm even more, like start to implement some of these bedrock foundational habits into your life that they will serve you and your family way into the future.
nice.
Good.
How are we doing for time?
25 past 1.
Okay.
When do you need to leave?
3. If you found today's episode interesting and you are focused on improving your health span and your lifespan, you might want to go and check out episode number 75. And we had cardiologist Caleb Gore with us explaining what and how things like cholesterol, blood pressure, all play a part in your health and what you can do about it if you have got any risk factors in those areas. So that's episode 75. Go and take a listen.